today we're going to shed a little bit of extra light, and it is especially relevant given the circumstances right now in Gaza and in Palestine, and that is our history as a Muslim ummah, our relationship with the Jewish people for the last 2,000 years before the creation of Israel, for the last 15 centuries. Because the fact of the matter is, Christian Europe treated this demographics in a very different way than we did. And multiple times in history, the Muslim ummah and the Muslim civilization played a vital role in protecting hundreds of thousands of persecuted Jewish people. So we need to be aware of this, and we need to know our own history. In the year 70 CE, in the time of Jesus Christ, after Jesus Christ, the second temple was destroyed, and so Judaism once again had its diaspora. They fled across the globe. So they didn't have a land. For the next 2,000 years, where were the Jewish people? Under Christian and then Muslim rule. For 1,400 years, before 1947, where were the Jewish people? Either in Christian lands or in Muslim lands. Okay, what is the difference between how the Jewish people were treated in Christian lands versus how they were treated in Muslim lands? This is the summary we're going to be discussing today. We need to understand Christianity from its inception has been extremely intolerant of the Jewish people. Why? Because according to their theology, what did the Jewish people do to their own God, to the Son of God? Well, according to their theology, what did they do? They murdered the Son of God. So from the beginning, there's a term that is found in Christian literature. It's called Christ killers. This is what they called the Jewish people, Christ killers. And that is why, generally speaking, in ancient Christianity, medieval Christianity, Jewish people were not treated as equal citizens. They didn't have the right to own property in most of European history. They were forced to live in special areas. The ancient term for this in Venice, the Venetian term, is still used in English. Guess what that term is? Ghetto. That term ghetto, where does it come from? Now we use ghetto to mean what? A very poor, very impoverished part of the city. Well, it was called ghetto for the first time in Venice in the 1200s from a Venetian term to mean low class. It's literally a term that was used for Jewish people. The term ghetto in English comes from them having to live in a separate place of the city. Jewish people in Europe were prohibited from any noble profession. They had to take ignoble tasks. They were prohibited from owning land. They were prohibited from rising up in the ranks of nobility. In fact, in the 11th century, when the Crusades was announced, in 1095, 1096, the first Crusaders, they left England, they left Italy, they left France, and they made their way to Jerusalem, wanting to free, quote-unquote, Jerusalem from Muslim lands. Do you know what happened before they reached Jerusalem? They started massacring Jewish people. Where? In Europe. Why? What has that got to do with Jerusalem? They began to reason, if we're going to go to Jerusalem where Jesus walked, we should avenge his death before we get there. And so, thousands, this is the first time where pogroms happened against Jewish people. Entire cities in Europe, entire cities in Germany, this is in 1096, 1097, entire cities were decimated from their Jewish populations. It is really pathetic what the Christians did. The women and children ran to the synagogues begging for freedom, and they burnt the synagogue with babies in it. They burnt it. Who? The Christians. Why? Because these are Christ killers. I say this because you need to know, where is this anger? Where is this anti-Semitic coming from? It's coming from Europe. We Muslims had nothing to do with any of this hatred. And you need to know the irony of how we can be accused when in reality this notion of anti-Semitism comes straight from Europe. The term anti-Semite, the birth of anti-Semite, the notions of anti-Semite, it has nothing to do with Arabs and Muslims. It is European and Christian through and through, 100%. Even the term is invented by the Christians and used by the Christians. This is just a summary of Christian lands. Let's move on to Muslim lands. Subhanallah, wherever Muslims went and there were Jewish people, the Jewish people faced a type of flourishing. They were given a type of protection they could never find in Christian lands. And when Muslims conquered what is currently Iraq, what is currently Iran, Iraq had a large population of Jews in Baghdad. In Iran, Isfahan, hundreds of thousands of Jewish people, and the Muslims came and found them. And they gave them protection under the treaty of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Jerusalem, when Umar ibn al-Khattab marched into Jerusalem, guess how many Jewish people were there? 0. Guess how many synagogues? 0. Jews were not allowed to worship in Jerusalem under the Christians. Guess who gave them the freedom to build the first synagogue after the collapse of the temple? It was none other than Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh. Umar ibn al-Khattab, acting upon Islamic commandments, acting upon prophetic guidelines. Jews and Christians are Ahli Kitab. They have the right to live freely. They have the right to worship. They have the right to build their synagogues and whatnot. The fact of the matter, never once in all of Islamic history was there a policy to kill all Jews. Was there a policy to persecute all Jews? Was there a policy to expel all Jews? So Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh allowed the Jewish people to come back into Jerusalem. This is the first time they could come back and build the first synagogue under the Khulafa al-Rashidun. And the rest, as they say, is history.